Hello, Cancer. I'm really glad you're here today. As I was sitting with your energy, I kept feeling something very quiet beneath the surface. Not loud, not dramatic, just a feeling that someone has been carrying emotions for much longer than they've been willing to admit. It almost feels like a person who spent so much time distracting themselves from what was in their heart that they eventually forgot how heavy it had become. The first card that caught my attention was the Hermit. What's interesting is that this doesn't feel like someone who walked away because they stopped caring. It feels more like someone who disappeared into their own thoughts. Someone who convinced themselves they needed distance. Someone who believed that avoiding their feelings would somehow make everything easier. Yet the more space they created, the louder those feelings seemed to become. Cancer, I keep seeing someone spending a lot of time alone lately. Maybe late at night. Maybe during quiet moments when there are no distractions left. They seem to be revisiting memories they thought they had already moved past. Some of those memories lead directly back to you. The moon appears beside the Hermit, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. Because this is where hidden emotions begin rising to the surface. Feelings that were buried, questions that were ignored, truths that felt too uncomfortable to face. Yeah, this energy feels deeply emotional. It feels like someone looking back and realizing that they never fully understood what they were feeling while they were living through it. At the time, fear may have been louder than love. Confusion may have been louder than clarity. Pride may have been louder than vulnerability. But something has shifted. The emotions they once pushed away seem impossible to ignore now. I'm seeing moments where your presence appears unexpectedly in their mind. A familiar song, a certain place, a random memory, a conversation they suddenly remember word for word, and every time it happens, there seems to be a growing awareness that what they felt was far more meaningful than they allowed themselves to acknowledge. The energy becomes softer when the Ace of Pentacles enters the reading, not because everything is suddenly solved, not because all the answers are magically appearing, but because there seems to be a new willingness emerging, a willingness to stop running, a willingness to consider possibilities they once dismissed. Almost like someone standing at the edge of a doorway, unsure whether they are ready to step through it, but no longer pretending the doorway doesn't exist. Oh my God, Cancer, this feels less about action and more about realization. The realization that some opportunities are rare. The realization that certain connections leave an imprint that time cannot easily erase. The realization that feelings do not always disappear simply because they are ignored. The Queen of Cups brings a very beautiful energy to this story. When I look at her, I keep feeling that your presence may have affected this person more deeply than they expected. Not necessarily because of what you said, not necessarily because of what you did, but because of how you made them feel. You may have shown them a level of emotional depth that was unfamiliar to them. You may have reflected parts of themselves they were not prepared to face. And sometimes people pull away from what touches them most deeply because it feels overwhelming. What fascinates me is that the energy here doesn't feel cold. It doesn't feel disconnected. If anything, it feels incredibly emotional, almost too emotional. Like someone standing in front of a truth they can no longer avoid. A truth that has been patiently waiting beneath the surface all along. Cancer, if this message resonates, it feels as though a quiet transformation is already unfolding behind the scenes. Nothing here feels rushed. Nothing here feels forced. It feels like emotions slowly finding their way back into the light after spending a long time hidden in the shadows. And as those feelings continue to rise, something even deeper begins to reveal itself. Something connected to memories. Something connected to the heart. Something connected to a realization that may be arriving much sooner than this person expected. Certain people leave a mark on our lives in ways that take time to understand. Cancer, what keeps coming through here is the feeling of someone slowly realizing that your place in their story was never as small as they once tried to believe. The Six of Cups appears, and the energy immediately feels different. Softer, warmer, more personal. This feels like someone wandering through old memories without meaning to. They may be focused on something completely unrelated, and suddenly a moment connected to you surfaces out of nowhere. A laugh, a look, a conversation, a day they haven't thought about in months. What surprises them is not the memory itself, it's the emotion attached to it. Because those emotions still seem alive, still carrying weight, still capable of touching something deep inside them. Yeah, this feels like the kind of realization that happens quietly. No audience, no dramatic announcement, just a person sitting alone and understanding something they weren't ready to understand before. The King of Cups brings an interesting shift. For a long time, this energy feels like someone who kept their emotions locked away behind a carefully controlled exterior. Maybe they thought staying composed would protect them. Maybe they believed feelings could be managed if they stayed busy enough. But emotions have a strange way of finding their own path, especially the ones that matter. I'm seeing someone becoming increasingly aware of how much they care. Not because they suddenly fell in love yesterday, not because something magical happened overnight, but because they can no longer ignore what has been there beneath the surface. There is a maturity entering this energy, a willingness to sit with uncomfortable truths instead of avoiding them, a willingness to admit that your presence affected them, that your absence affected them too. Sometimes people spend so much time trying not to need someone that they never stop to ask themselves why that person keeps appearing in their thoughts. That question feels important here, because once they start asking it honestly, the answers begin showing up. The Ace of Swords feels like one of those moments where everything becomes difficult to deny. Not necessarily easy, just clear. Clear enough that excuses start losing their power. Clear enough that certain stories they've told themselves no longer feel convincing. Maybe they once believed timing was the problem. Maybe they blamed circumstances. Maybe they convinced themselves that distance would eventually erase everything. But clarity has a way of cutting through old narratives, and when it arrives, it often asks people to face what they truly feel rather than what feels convenient. Oh my God, Cancer, there is something very vulnerable about this energy. Because recognizing someone's importance can be beautiful, but it can also be frightening, especially when there are things left unsaid, especially when there are moments that cannot be taken back, especially when the heart begins understanding something the mind spent a long time resisting. The star appears almost like a quiet light in the distance, not demanding attention, not forcing anything, just existing. What fascinates me is that this doesn't feel like hope based on fantasy. It feels more grounded than that, almost like someone beginning to believe that healing is possible, that honesty is possible, that understanding may still have a place where confusion once lived. I keep sensing a growing respect as well, a deeper appreciation for who you are, not an idealized version, not a fantasy, the real you, your strength, your sensitivity, the way you carry yourself after difficult experiences, the way you continue moving forward even when life asks a lot from you. Those qualities seem impossible for this person to overlook anymore. Cancer, there is a feeling here that certain emotional walls are becoming harder to maintain. Not because someone is being pressured, not because they have all the answers, but because the truth often becomes heavier to carry than the fear of acknowledging it. Something inside them appears to be moving toward greater honesty, greater understanding, greater emotional courage. And as those realizations continue unfolding, another layer begins waiting beneath the surface. A layer connected not only to what was felt, but also to what was lost, what was regretted, and what can no longer be ignored. Some lessons arrive gently, others seem to arrive all at once, carrying a weight that cannot be ignored. Cancer. The energy surrounding this chapter feels very emotional because it centers around realization, but not the comfortable kind. The Five of Cups appears, and what I keep sensing is someone looking backward with different eyes than they had before. Certain moments seem to carry a different meaning now. Certain choices feel heavier. Certain memories seem impossible to revisit without feeling something in their chest. Yeah, this feels like the kind of regret that develops slowly. Not because someone suddenly discovered they cared, not because they suddenly became emotional, but because time has given them enough distance to see the bigger picture. I keep seeing someone replaying situations in their mind. A conversation they wish had gone differently. A message they never sent. Words they wish they could take back. Moments when pride seemed more important than vulnerability. The difficult thing about regret is that it often arrives after clarity. Once the fog begins to lift, people start seeing what was standing right in front of them all along. And that appears to be happening here. Judgment enters the reading with a very powerful feeling. Not dramatic, not punishing, just honest. Almost like a mirror being held up to someone's heart. There are moments in life when we can distract ourselves, stay busy, blame circumstances, convince ourselves that everyone else is responsible. This energy feels different. It feels like someone becoming willing to examine their own role in what happened. That isn't always easy, especially when the answers aren't flattering, especially when accountability asks us to acknowledge places where fear guided our decisions more than love did. I keep feeling a deep emotional awakening attached to this card, a person beginning to understand that certain wounds were created not only by what happened, but also by what never happened, the conversations avoided, the emotions hidden, the honesty postponed, the chances that quietly slipped away. Cancer. There is something incredibly human about this energy. Because most people have experienced a moment where they looked back and realized they could have handled something differently. The difference here is that the emotional attachment still seems very present. The Nine of Swords feels almost restless, like thoughts that refuse to stay quiet. I don't see someone peacefully moving on. I see someone wrestling with themselves, trying to sleep and finding their mind wandering elsewhere, trying to focus and getting pulled back into reflection, trying to move forward while carrying unanswered questions. Oh my God, this feels exhausting. Not because they are being punished, but because the heart has a way of demanding honesty when something truly matters. The more they attempt to push certain feelings away, the more those feelings seem to ask for attention. There is guilt here, there is sadness, there is longing. There may even be moments where they wonder whether things could have unfolded differently if they had simply been more open, more courageous, or more emotionally available. The Three of Swords deepens the emotional atmosphere even further. What strikes me most is that this card doesn't feel focused on blame, it feels focused on understanding pain, pain they may have caused, pain they may have experienced themselves, pain that grew because two people were carrying emotions that never fully found a voice. Sometimes heartbreak isn't created by a lack of love. Sometimes heartbreak grows in the space between love and fear, and that space feels very present here. I keep sensing someone slowly connecting the dots between past actions and present emotions, recognizing patterns, recognizing reactions, recognizing how certain fears may have influenced choices that ultimately created distance rather than closeness. Cancer, this part of the journey feels less about fixing anything and more about feeling everything, allowing emotions that were avoided to finally rise to the surface, allowing tears that were postponed to finally arrive, allowing truths that were buried to finally be acknowledged. Because healing often begins the moment people stop running from what hurts. Something important seems to be happening within this person. Not outwardly, not publicly, deep inside. A process of emotional reckoning, a process of understanding, a process that may eventually lead them toward a very different response than the one they once chose. And as this weight continues settling into their awareness, another shift begins quietly forming beneath it. One connected to vulnerability, forgiveness, and the possibility of reaching toward what was once left behind. A softer energy begins to emerge here, Cancer. Not because everything suddenly feels easy. Not because every wound has disappeared. What changes is the intention behind the emotions. The Page of Cups appears, and it feels like someone standing at the edge of vulnerability, trying to gather enough courage to express what has been living inside their heart. I keep sensing hesitation, not avoidance, not denial, just hesitation. The kind that happens when a person genuinely cares about the outcome. When someone's feelings matter this much, every word can feel important. Every message can feel important. Every possible response can feel important. I keep seeing someone rehearsing conversations in their mind, imagining how something might begin, wondering whether an apology would be accepted, wondering whether enough time has passed, wondering whether the connection still carries the same warmth it once did. There is a tenderness surrounding this energy that feels very different from earlier chapters. The emotional walls do not seem as rigid anymore. The defenses don't feel quite as strong. The heart appears to be leading more than fear, and that's significant, because fear often asks people to stay silent. The heart asks people to be honest. The Knight of Cups steps forward with an energy that feels deeply sincere, not perfect, not fearless, just sincere. I don't get the feeling that this person wants grand gestures or dramatic declarations. What I feel is something much simpler. A desire to be understood. A desire to offer honesty where silence once existed. A desire to show emotions instead of hiding them. Yeah, this feels like someone slowly becoming ready to stop carrying everything alone. There are moments in life when people realize that protecting themselves has become more painful than opening up. And that realization seems to be growing here. Cancer, I keep feeling that this person has spent a long time imagining what they would say if they had the chance. Not because they have all the answers, not because they know exactly how everything would unfold, but because certain feelings refuse to stay buried forever. The Six of Swords brings a very meaningful shift in the atmosphere. The energy begins moving, not rushing, not forcing, just moving. Like someone becoming tired of carrying old burdens, tired of replaying painful chapters, tired of remaining trapped inside stories that no longer need to define the future. What fascinates me is that this doesn't feel focused on winning. It doesn't feel focused on proving a point. It feels focused on finding peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when people stop fighting themselves. The kind that comes when people choose understanding over conflict. I keep seeing someone who no longer wants to be controlled by old misunderstandings. Someone who wants to leave emotional turbulence behind and move towards something calmer. Something healthier. Something more honest. Oh my God, There is such a human quality to this energy, because healing often begins long before two people ever speak again. Healing begins when someone decides they no longer want resentment to guide them, when they no longer want fear making every decision, when they start choosing compassion for themselves and for others. The Three of Cups introduces a feeling of warmth that has been missing for quite some time. Not necessarily certainty, not necessarily resolution. Warmth, the memory of laughter, the memory of connection, the memory of feeling comfortable in someone's presence. I keep sensing someone remembering what felt good about this bond rather than focusing only on what hurt. And that shift changes everything internally. Because when pain is the only thing people look at, hope becomes difficult to see. When they allow themselves to remember the joy too, the story becomes more complete. Cancer. This energy feels like emotional healing, gradually creating space for something new. Not replacing the past, not pretending difficult moments never happened. Simply creating room for understanding, creating room for forgiveness, creating room for a conversation that comes from the heart rather than from fear. Something appears to be drawing closer within this person's emotional world. A quiet readiness, a willingness to lower their guard, a willingness to risk vulnerability in ways they may not have been capable of before. And as that willingness continues growing, another chapter begins forming around choices, timing, and the possibility of reaching toward a connection that still seems to hold an important place within their heart. A feeling of movement begins surrounding this final chapter. Cancer. Not rushed movement, not dramatic movement, just the sense that something inside a person has been changing for a while, and those inner changes are slowly influencing the choices they make. The Wheel of Fortune appears first, and what stands out to me is how different this energy feels from the beginning of the story. Life has a strange way of bringing people back to lessons they thought they had already finished learning. Sometimes we circle around the same emotions, the same questions, the same connections. Not because we're being punished, but because there may still be something meaningful waiting to be understood. I keep sensing someone looking at their journey differently than they once did. Experiences that felt random no longer seem quite so random. Mistakes that once felt meaningless seem to carry lessons. Even difficult moments appear to have contributed to the person they are becoming. Yeah. There is a growing awareness that some encounters leave a lasting imprint on the soul. Not every connection changes us. Some do, and this energy feels connected to one of those experiences. The Four of Wands brings a very comforting atmosphere into the reading. What fascinates me is that this doesn't feel focused on excitement. It feels focused on stability, comfort, belonging. I keep seeing someone imagining what peace would feel like. Not the temporary peace that comes from avoiding difficult emotions. Real peace. The kind that comes from authenticity. The kind that comes from being able to show up as yourself without wearing armor. Cancer. There is a sense here that your energy may represent something familiar to them. Not familiar because it is predictable. Familiar because it feels emotionally safe, because somewhere within their heart they associate your presence with warmth, with acceptance, with understanding. The King of Pentacles steps forward with an energy that feels much more grounded than what we've seen earlier in this journey. There was a time when emotions seemed to dominate everything. Fear, confusion, regret, longing. Those feelings had their place. But this card feels different. It feels like someone asking themselves practical questions. Questions about what truly matters. Questions about what they want to invest their time, energy, and heart into. Questions about what kind of future aligns with the person they are becoming. Oh my God, there is something incredibly mature about this energy. Because emotional growth is not only about recognizing feelings, it's also about deciding what to do with those feelings. I keep sensing someone who no longer wants to be guided only by impulse. Someone who wants their actions to reflect what their heart already knows. Someone who wants consistency to matter as much as emotion. The Chariot introduces determination into the story. Not aggressive determination, not reckless determination. Focused determination. The kind that appears after a long period of reflection. The kind that develops when someone finally understands the direction they want to move toward. What I find interesting is that this card doesn't feel like certainty. It feels like willingness. Willingness to stop standing still. Willingness to move beyond old fears. Willingness to trust themselves more than they did before. Cancer. Throughout this reading, there has been a recurring theme of emotional honesty. A person confronting feelings they once avoided, recognizing value they once overlooked, learning from experiences they cannot change, allowing compassion to replace defensiveness. And somewhere along that path, a different version of this person seems to have emerged. Not perfect, not finished, just more aware, more open, more connected to their heart. The energy here feels less concerned with controlling outcomes and more concerned with showing up authentically. Because sometimes the most meaningful conversations aren't created by perfect timing. They're created by courage. They're created when someone decides that honesty matters more than fear. When someone chooses vulnerability despite uncertainty. When someone allows their truth to be seen. And that is where this story seems to pause. Not at an ending, not even at a conclusion, but at a doorway. A place where reflection has led to understanding, where understanding has led to growth, and where growth may eventually create space for something that once felt impossible to approach. What happens beyond that doorway belongs to the choices, emotions, and timing of the people involved. For now, the cards simply leave us with the image of a heart that has traveled a long road and is finally becoming willing to listen to itself. Cancer, there is a feeling here that not every chapter closes the moment we think it does. Some stories continue quietly in the background, teaching us, changing us, and helping us see ourselves more clearly. Whatever is unfolding in your life right now, I hope you remember that your healing matters, your growth matters, and the love you give so freely to others is something you deserve to receive as well. Thank you for allowing me to share this space with you today. Thank you for bringing your energy into this reading. Take gentle care of yourself, Cancer, and I'll be here for the next message whenever you're ready. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. You all mean a lot, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Okay, bye.